This is the new and improved SV555, and this scope is a little bit unusual because it works as both a telescope and a camera lens. And at just under $600 US, it makes it one of the most affordable wide-field options on the market today for astrophotography. That means it's great for capturing large galaxies and sprawling nebulae. And it's also very easy to use. And if you've ever used something like a prime telephoto lens before, well then the user experience will feel very familiar, with similar focusing and a variable aperture, but this time with optics that are made for astrophotography. Now, the original SV55 was arguably very popular, but some people reported some issues with some weird looking stars and not being able to achieve focus. So Svbony, the creator of the SV55, took all of that feedback and then they created this little dude. So how well does it really perform? Well, in this review, we're going to check out everything that this dude comes with. We're then going to dive into the features and specs and look at some of the updated features. And then we're going to see how the optics performed. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to share a final image that I took using this telescope/lens. Alrighty, party people, I'm Sarah Matthews. And as always, grab a snack and let's jump into it. So what are the big selling points for this little scope? Well, for one, it is built for wide-field astrophotography. It's super easy to use, and it does have APO-corrected optics. But for me, at least, the biggest selling point is the fact that out of all the other Petzval astrographs in its class, the SV55 is the cheapest option. And for me, the value to price ratio really stood out, and that's why I even agreed to review this. And so Svbony did send me this unit for review, but as always, they have no say over the content of this video. And as with any review that I ever do, my hope is that it just helps you in your journey, wherever that it is that it ends up taking you. So at 243 millimeters of focal length with an aperture of 54 millimeters, this puts this little dude squarely and firmly in that wide field astrophotography territory. And I think that's going to be great for a lot of different types of users. If you're a beginner, well, that wide of image scale is going to be pretty forgiving of tracking errors that you may have. While at the same time, if you're more of an intermediate to advanced user, maybe using something that's heavier or maybe something with a longer focal length, this is going to kind of round out the arsenal that you have by giving you something that's a little bit more portable and a little bit wider. But if you're also somebody who's been using camera lenses for a while, maybe something between the 50 millimeter to 135 millimeter range, well, this kind of seems like that natural next step. You do get something a little bit deeper, but still keeping things wide. But this time you do get optics that are corrected to meet the demands for astrophotography, because, well, most camera lenses are made for daytime photography, so they're not necessarily going to try to correct to get pinpoint stars throughout the entire field of view, nor, the level of color correction that you would need for, areas of high contrast like stars. And so to achieve that level of correction, it's all about the optical design. So the SV55 is what is called an apochromatic refractor, or sometimes called APO for short, which basically just means that it can take the different colors of light and focus them onto a single point so that you don't have color fringing around areas of high contrast, like stars, for example. Sometimes called chromatic aberration is basically not really an issue. Now, the SV55 is also what is called a Petzval design. So it has two other glass elements, one here and one here, that basically flatten out the entire field of view so that you get pinpoint round stars all the way to the edge. And that's really nice because you don't have to worry about getting a separate field flattener like you would with something like a doublet or a more traditional triplet refractor. And you don't necessarily have to get precise back focusing to get everything to focus. But everything that you need to get started is pretty much here. And once you've got it all set up, it's very easy to use. And if you have any sort of experience using something like a prime telephoto lens, then like I said earlier, the experience feels oddly familiar. So it has very smooth focusing, but it also comes with a variable aperture from f4.5 all the way up to f22. And the fact that it is $599 US is pretty compelling, especially when you consider that the SQA55 and the RedCat 51 are about $200 to $300 more than this little dude. And that doesn't even take into consideration how much more expensive, camera lenses could be that are corrected at this level. So yeah, now let's get into everything that this little dude comes with, and then we'll go into the features and specs. All right, so here is the box that it came in. I did wonder if there was a cat inside of it at first because I was like, wait a minute, this is a box. Cats love boxes. But then also it made me think, like, is the cat alive or is it dead? So then I was like, well, maybe I should open it up or maybe I shouldn't. But that's neither here nor there. Let's get into the actual what's in the box for this telescope/lens. We have a little bag with a manual in it right here. Okay, so we have a multifunctional handlebar, if you will. We also have a dovetail saddle, very nice. And then we have this EAF bracket, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then over here, we have a clamshell ring. Then we also have a riser block. And we have an EAF kit, or the rest of the EAF kit, with a timing pulley and a timing belt and some little screws. And then we have an assortment of Allen keys and very long and very short hex screws. We also have a travel bag. Feels really well made. There are two little zippers here. And on the inside, it's like very soft. Okay, so here is the camera lens in all of its glory. So starting with the overall aesthetic of the SV555, it definitely has some very chunky sign lens vibes going on. So it's as if it should be on a film set as well as on a telescope mount, which I think is pretty cool. And then paired with the white and silver and red accents along with the black telescope or lens part, I really feel like someone like Darth Maul would certainly use something like this if they were ever to get into astrophotography. That is assuming that Darth Maul does accessorize with silver jewelry, which I'm pretty sure is the case. But if you think otherwise, let me know down in the comments. But yeah, anyways, it does have this sheen matte look going on, and that's a little bit different than the original, which had a different sandblasting process, which I believe was at 320 grit to what is now a 280 grit, which basically just results in a more matte finish. So if your oil glands on your fingertips run kind of heavy, well then this would be the version for you. And yeah, it is going to be a little bit different than something like the Red Cat 51 or the SQA55's finish, which is more of this kind of anodized aluminum throughout. So I do really like this industrial look though. It's kind of more of my vibe. And yeah, so in terms of the overall build quality and mechanics, it is made out of all aluminum minus the lens cap, but it being made out of all aluminum does give it a very robust feel to it. It does feel lightweight still and portable, but again, it does feel like it has has something going on to it. So the lens tube just on its own does weigh in at about 4 pounds or just under 2 kilograms. And then with everything that you see here, it does come in at about 5 pounds or so. Now let's talk more about this saucy lens hood that I know you've been eyeing, or maybe you haven't been, but you will. I don't know. But yeah, this is a dew shield or lens hood, whatever you like to call it. And it's really great for protecting the lens or the optics from stray light, as well as giving the lens some more structural integrity, if you will. And the diameter of the lens hood has changed just a wee bit. It used to be 97 millimeters and now it's down to 93 millimeters. But yeah, with the diameter being 93 millimeters, that does give you a circumference of about 292 millimeters. So if you do live in a more humid environment, then you would want to get something like a dew strap or heater strap to wrap around the lens hood to keep the optics from, getting some condensation. Now the lens hood is removable, which I think is pretty cool. It does thread off like this. So the threads are very smooth, which I appreciate. That's indicative of good machining. There are threads on the inside here at the back, and then there are threads on the front here. So it just goes like that. Now taking off the lens hood is nice for, making this even more portable. So if you didn't want to put it in the bag that it comes with and put it with all of your other camera lenses while you're traveling, that's always a nice thing to do. Now up front, we do have a lens cap. It does have a pinch and twist user experience going on, and that should help just to kind of give it more of a secure attachment, because secure attachments are really helpful to have as humans as well. But it's okay whatever attachment style you have. But basically, yeah, you just twist it off and there are threads on the inside. Now what's cool about these internal threads here is that you can actually add a 72mm front end filter. So if you are into doing some really cool terrestrial work, or if you wanted to do something creative in astro that you wouldn't use a back end filter for, that's what you would want to use it for. But we will talk more about other types of filters that you can use with this later on. But overall, this lens cap is a much different user experience than something you would see with the SQA55 or the Red Cat 51, which has a more over-the-barrel type lens cap going on. So let's talk more about the optical layout here. We do have 5 glass elements inside, which makes it a quintuplet. So we have a section up here for the primary objective, and that contains 3 of those lenses. 2 of those lenses within that 3 are what's called extra low dispersion glass, or ED glass, and that basically helps to give you another level of color correction so that you don't have chromatic aberration, and if you do, it's very minimal. And that's important because we don't want color fringing around stars or other areas of high contrast, so it really helps to eliminate chromatic aberration, which you may see in kind of lower end telescopes or a lot of camera lenses. Now, in the back sections, as I kind of noted earlier, there are 2 other glass elements, but those basically help to flatten out the field of view so that you get round stars all the way to the edge. Because again, with a lot of camera lenses that aren't corrected for astrophotography, you might not be getting those stars that are pinpoint and round, but the field flattener that's built into here does help with that. And that's a nice thing about this being a Petzval design, is that you don't have to really think about getting an extra field flattener, which in and of itself does cost more money, and then you do have to add it on the back here. And they can be very particular when it comes to the back focus specifications to get your, entire setup into focus. But all that is just built in here, and it's really nice that way. Now for some comparative context here, the Red Cat 51 does have 4 glass elements instead of 5 like we see here, but it does use a pretty high quality level of glass called FPL 53. But whether or not that really makes any sort of difference, we're going to see in the optical test that we do later on. And then the SQA55 from ASCAR does have 5 elements as well. And just like a camera lens, the more optical elements that you have, it typically does make it more well corrected. But in terms of the overall glass, it does have 1 piece of ED glass and 1 piece of glass that is called SD glass, all of which should help to give you some good color correction. And then in terms of the specific type of glass, I'm not totally sure what that is for the SQA55 because ASCAR and Sharpstar don't really give those details out to the public, and that includes myself. So yeah, if you do know what it is, let me know. But again, the SV555 does have a pretty large imaging circle of 44mm, which should support all the way up to full frame sensors, which is really nice. So one of the things that really makes the SV555 stand out compared to a lot of the traditional telescopes out there is the fact that it has a variable aperture, which is much more similar to a traditional camera lens. And so again, at its widest, it is at f4.5, and at its smallest, it's at f22. By default, you're going to want to use that f4.5 if you are trying to image anything like a star cluster or a nebula or a galaxy, because you're going to want to collect as much light as you can. But down on the lens tube, you will find this aperture scale from f4.5 through f22, along with a grooved control ring and a locking knob to hold your setting in place. The ring has a smooth feel with enough grip to adjust pretty easily. Now, stopping down will give you some more creative opportunities. So if you've ever wanted to photograph the moon, you certainly could with this little dude by stopping down to maybe f5.6 or f11, just depending on if you're tracking or not. Because the moon is very bright, you don't want to overexpose it. And so if you do have something like a 533 or 585 small sensor type cameras, that is going to give you a much more zoomed in look compared to something like an APS-C or a full frame. But in any case, I do think that's really nice to be able to stop down for lunar photography. Now, in terms of creative terrestrial photography, you could certainly stop this down and create some really cool diffraction spikes on water if you wanted to. My good friend, Alex Noriega, who is an incredible landscape and nature photographer, did that here in this photo called Gravitation. If you don't know who he is, I highly recommend checking him out. Thank you, Alex, for letting me use this and for giving me this idea. So yeah, there are lots of different creative opportunities. The SQA55 does have a variable aperture as well, just like this, but the Red Cat 51 does not have a variable aperture. All right, so now let's talk about the focuser. The SV555 does have a single speed helical focuser. The focuser does have graded traction marks, which makes it pretty easy to move. There's also a locking knob that you would unlock to move things around, and it is very smooth. And then the locking knob is really nice because it does keep things in place. Now, one of the key upgrades for this version is its increased focus travel, which went from 2.6 millimeters in the original and is now at 3.22 millimeters in this version. Now that extra bit does solve the issue that some users reported experiencing in the original version, which was the fact that they couldn't achieve focus with some certain types of cameras, but they could if they did add a filter in the back here, but that's not a long-term solution, so that's why Svbony created this new version with the increased focus travel. I have tested this with a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, and dedicated astro cameras with and without filters, and I have been able to achieve focus. Now going back to the single speed focuser here, because I do have some experience with the RedCat 51 and its first generation, which had a very similar type of focuser, and because I have experience using prime telephoto lenses and those focusers, the experience is very similar, but I can see if you are a beginner, then it might be kind of easy to overshoot when you're trying to focus and get those stars really pinpoint and round. And so that being said, I would recommend getting something like a Botnov mask, which just creates diffraction spikes on very large stars, which helps you when you are trying to focus to get perfectly round stars. They are pretty accessible in terms of price, and you can 3D print them relatively easy if you do have a 3D printer at home. And also you can use an EAF or an electronic autofocuser with this telescope, and it's pretty easy to do that. So if you do have something like the ZWO EAF first gen, you should be able to use that with the EAF kit that comes with this lens. Let's talk more about the other types of accessories that this little dude comes with. Starting with this clamshell ring. So it comes with this locking knob right here, which is nice because you don't have to use some sort of tool like an Allen wrench to open it and close it, which is pretty convenient. So on the inside of the clamshell ring, there is some white felt lining, which should help to protect the body of the camera lens here. And then here is the back right here. Now on top of the clamshell ring, there are 4 holes that you could use to mount something like this to, which is a multifunctional handlebar. And this multifunctional handlebar is really nice for adding things like a mini PC or an ASAR or a guide scope or finder scope. Now, if you are planning on using extras like an EAF or an electronic filter wheel on the back here, then using a riser block like this is really nice. And this gives you some extra spacing between the dovetail plate and the lens here. So if you're using an EAF, this is where it would go. But if you're using an electronic filter wheel on the back here, well then this riser is going to give you some room from your mount in case you are potentially going to hit it. You of course can also skip the riser altogether if you're trying to save on weight, for example, because again, it's not always necessary. So let's talk about the dovetail saddle now. It is 185 millimeters in length and 15.5 millimeters thick, and it is dual purpose, so you can use it as a Vixen style dovetail plate, which is pretty common if you're going to be using any sort of equatorial mount, but you can also use it as a Arca Swiss dovetail plate, which is really nice if you're going to be using some sort of Arca Swiss ball head, for example, or any sort of Arca Swiss configuration. And to use it either or, you just flip it one way or the other to get that side that you want. There are several holes on the dovetail saddle, so you can mount different types of accessories. You can move the clamshell ring upwards or downwards if you need to for balance purposes. There is also a central hole that allows you to mount directly to a tripod for more of those quick setups. Speaking of more accessories, there are 4 holes here on the clamshell ring in case you wanted to add some sort of finder base to be able to add like a ASAR finder base shoe here, or a mini PC that you could just have right here. Now moving on to the back here, we do have a camera angle adjuster, or a CAA for short. It is really nice because you're able to move your camera 360 degrees pretty easily, so you can get the composition that you want. It's really nice from a creative perspective because you don't always want to just be locked into whatever your camera is as it threads on. And so there is a locking knob on the bottom here, so it's pretty easy to unlock. It's very similar to the other locking knobs here. There is some engraved traction here, which makes it pretty easy to move about. There's resistance, but there isn't like a ton of resistance. It's just a really nice, smooth user experience. However, if you do not have this clamshell ring totally all the way secure, then you will end up moving the entire camera lens, which I guess is another way to, angle your camera. But that of course indicates that things are not totally secure. So if you do run into that problem, then I would recommend you swapping out this locking knob here for an M5 knob instead, which should give you some more security, but so far it hasn't been too bad. Now at the back of the telescope, we do have M48 threads, which is pretty universal for most astrographs these days, or telescopes that are made specifically to be used as astrophotography telescopes. And so this is where you would connect your camera adapter. For a DSLR and mirrorless camera, you are going to need what is called a T-ring. So for a DSLR, for example, like this here, this is a Canon T7, you would want something that looks like this. This is a T-ring with an M48 diameter in the middle here. So T-rings are camera lens mount specific, so you would want to make sure that you get one that is specifically for your camera's lens mount. So whatever lens mount it has, you would get that T-ring. And so you basically just line up the red dot on a Canon, for example, with the groove here, and it will just click into place. Now for a dedicated astronomy camera like this 2600, you basically would just, of course, take the top off. And most dedicated astronomy cameras will come with all of the dedicated spacers that you would need to achieve that 55 millimeters of back focus. So in most cases, you're going to need a 21 millimeter spacer ring like this and a 16.5 millimeter spacer ring like this, together with this tilt plate adapter and the distance between the front of the camera to its actual sensor. That does get you to that 55 millimeters of back spacing. Now, what you need for your exact camera will usually be depicted in your camera's manual or online. It's pretty easy to figure out these days, so just make sure that you check that out. Okay, so now let's talk about filters, because we did talk about the fact that you can put M72 front end filters in the front here in the lens barrel. But if you wanted to add your more traditional 2-inch astro filters that are under 10 millimeters in thickness, then they would go right in here. To do this, we do have to remove 4 different screws, which are here. So I'm going to do that now. It does come with a hex key that you would need to do this. So I got the last screw off, and it just pops off like that. So this here is the SV555. It's a dual narrowband filter for HA and O3 types of targets. So you just take this side, put these little screws back, and it looks like that. This is going to be the best option if you are using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera where you do have a T-ring in the mix with everything, and you do need to make sure that you have that specific spacing required, because you wouldn't be able to use something like a filter drawer that I'll show you in a little bit. Otherwise, for a DSLR or mirrorless camera, you can use a clip-in filter like this, and it sits right in the front of your camera's sensor, which is really nice. So that's one option if you don't want to use this, because it is very, very cumbersome. You could, of course, still use a dedicated astronomy camera with this kind of filter application, but I would actually really recommend that you use a filter drawer instead and replace the 21 millimeter spacer ring. So speaking of filter drawers, so the next thing that I'm going to show you is an actual filter drawer that you can use with a dedicated astronomy camera, for example, for your narrowband filter or your UV IR cut filter, for example. And this is kind of comes in a couple different components. Okay, so then this is where you would put the filter in here, and you would just thread it into place. Okay, so I have the filter here, and then I just add it in here. Very secure, which is good. I would highly recommend getting something like this. Otherwise, you would have to install the 2-inch filters by removing those 4 little baby screws. So yeah, just think those things over. Now let's get into the optics review and see our final image. Alrighty, so I tested both the SV555 and the RedCat 51 first generation for comparison. I was running the same exact set of tests with 2 different sets of cameras, an APS-C size sensor, and a full frame, which I'll discuss why I did that. So we're gonna see a bunch of different images. I am gonna also be sharing my final image at the end here that I took as well, so stick around. So in these tests, I was mainly looking for chromatic aberration, and again, that is color fringing that you sometimes see around bright stars or other areas of high contrast, as well as other optical issues like unusual star shapes that appeared in some of the earlier SV55 batches from the first generation. I was also looking at field flatness or field curvature, meaning how round the stars stay toward the edge. Since these are both Petzval designs, well, they should technically have pretty round stars all the way up to the edge, which is what I was using the full frame for. And then I was also checking for vignetting, which is light fall off towards the edges as well. So we are here in PixInsight. This is an astronomy data processing software tool. We're going to be starting off with the chromatic aberration tests and just the overall star shape tests. We are looking at raw exposures that have not been calibrated, so no flats, darks, or biases. These are just straight up raw images still in a linear state, so they're still going to be dark. The only thing that I've done is debayer them so that we can actually see the color, because again, these are raw images. And I have some single images, but I also have some stacked images. So for these stacked images, I did have to do some star alignment and also do debayering. So we're going to start with the Red Cat 51, looking at 30-second exposures first for chromatic aberration with the ASI 2600 MC Pro, which has 3.67 micron sized pixels paired with a focal length of 250 millimeters. That's an image scale of 3.31 arc seconds per pixel, which isn't perfect sampling, but with this focal length and really with most camera sensors and the pixel sizes of them, that's not going to be very bad at all, especially at this wide field of view. Now, target-wise, I did use a very bright star called Deneb, which was just about completely vertical during these tests for my location and timing of these tests, which is really good. That's what you want. I did not use any sort of filter in any of these tests, so these are just straight up one-shot color images. I'm going to use the screen transfer function over here. I'm going to unlink the color channels and apply a temporary auto stretch so we can see what we're doing. Minimize that. Okay, so at first glance, everything looks really nice. I don't see any issues with the big stars throughout the field of view, which is really great, and no noticeable chromatic aberration, at least at this vantage point. So let's go ahead and zoom in to the center. We do have some hot pixels. You can just disregard those. And the star shape looks really nice, which is good. Star colors look really good too. I don't see any noticeable chromatic aberration, which would be either yellow and red around the stars or green and purple. So that's really good. This is just a single sub at 30 seconds, but let's go ahead and look at the stacked image, because in a stacked image, you're going to see more chromatic aberration if it does exist. So this is 15 minutes of 30-second exposures. And at first glance, everything looks really good still. I do have a dust mote here, but that's okay. Star shape looks really good. Zoom in. Really nice star shape quality. I don't see any sort of reflections throughout either. We zoom in some more. I don't see any crazy chromatic aberration at all, which is excellent. Very well color corrected, just as you would expect. Now let's go on to the SV555 and the ASI 2600 MC Pro. So just at first glance at this 30-second sub, it does look really good. I don't see any weird star shapes with the largest star here or any of the larger stars. So let's zoom into the center here. The star shape looks really nice. I don't see anything super crazy, which is good. The star colors look really nice too. I don't see any obvious chromatic aberration with this single sub exposure. This is a hot pixel, so just ignore that. But yeah, overall with this single sub, chromatic aberration looks good. Let's go ahead and minimize it and open up the stacked 15-minute. Again, first glance, everything looks good. No weird star shapes. Let's zoom in. So the star looks pretty good. The colors look pretty good too around these bright stars. I'm not sure if you'd qualify that as purple fringing here. It's pretty on par with the Red Cat 51, which is excellent. The star shape maybe isn't as good as the Red Cat 51, but it's still pretty good. Yeah, not crazy chromatic aberration, if anything at all. Very well corrected for, especially for the price point. Very impressed. So let's go ahead and look at the full frame images for field curvature and vignetting. So we're going to come over here and we're going to start with the Red Cat 51. So we're going to only be looking at a single 30-second exposure and a mosaic, which I'll show you in a little bit. But the reason is because 30 seconds gives us enough time to at least see if there are any issues in the field of view. And if we do see any sort of trailing, at least we know that at 30 seconds, it's probably not going to be a result of poor guiding or poor tracking. So at first glance, we do have some vignetting here in the corners, which is light fall off. And I do know that at least for the third generation, if not the second generation of the Red Cat 51, that this light fall off should have been corrected for at full frame. Otherwise, this vignetting can be corrected with flats. So I'm going to show you a mosaic next, which is going to show the outer edges, and it's going to show you the center as well, because we want to see any sort of field curvature that there might be. Apply an auto stretch, and at the center, everything looks really good, which I would expect to be the case. Over here looks pretty decent. On the bottom here, the stars look really nice. Very good. Here, the stars look good. Stars look good here. Stars look decent here, but you're starting to kind of get some weird star shapes here and star elongation up at the upper right-hand corner, which hypothetically, as long as a Petzval design does achieve focus, which I was able to because I did use the RedCat 51's Botanov mask that it comes with, then technically you are in the realm of being good to go in terms of the back focus spacing. So this could be tilt. The RedCat 51 does have a tilt adapter, so maybe I need to mess around with that a little bit. This doesn't look too bad, but the stars are still elongated. And even here, the stars are elongated as well, going outwards. So that's something to look into more. So let's go ahead and look at the SV555. Let's give this an auto stretch. So at first glance, everything looks pretty good in terms of any sort of noticeable vignetting. Definitely not as bad as the RedCat 51 first gen. We do have a dust mote here, which can be corrected with flats. So I'm gonna minimize this so that we can look at the field curvature. Let's give it a stretch. The center looks really nice, which I would expect anyways. The bottom left looks pretty good. They're not perfectly round, but that's okay. I'm not totally mad about that. The stars here look pretty good. Totally round. Stars at the bottom right look pretty good too. They are slightly elongated maybe. Here they look pretty good too. Maybe there's some slight eccentricity, maybe from tilt. And then there are some egg shapes or comets shaped stars here at the upper right-hand corner, which I'm assuming is tilt because here at the upper center, we do have the stars going in the same direction. So I'm guessing that's probably a little bit of tilt. And then here at the upper left-hand corner, the stars are perfectly round. So I do think that the stars over here are a result of tilt because they're all going in the same direction. So yeah, I guess it's probably just tilt, but we can double check for sure. This is a luminance, so I'm just looking at the luminance data, and then I'm gonna come up here to scripts, image analysis, and we're gonna look at the full width at half maximum eccentricity. I'm gonna measure, gonna press support, so it creates another image, close out of that. And there does seem to be a little bit of eccentricity over here. The full width at half maximum star size is a little bit bigger, which makes sense. So there was a little bit of tilt, I believe. So yeah, that makes sense why we are seeing some star shapes that are less than perfectly round. So that's good. Now, overall, I do think that the SV555 performed exceptionally well, especially at this price point. But I do want to show you a final image that I took using this telescope/lens of a Regent in Cygnus. It's one of my favorites, and I use the ASI 2600mm Pro, which is a monochrome camera. And here's my final image. If you would like access to this data set or you just want to support this channel, please consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon for exclusive content. Your support really means a lot. And if you also liked this video, please consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up. But what do you guys think about the SV555? Let me know down in the comments, and until the next video, I hope you all have clear skies. Thanks everyone.